The framed photo of me in uniform stared back from my desk, mocking me with its place of honor. Mary had insisted we display it prominently, proud of her wounded hero. My fingers traced the glass, touching the face of a young man who'd ceased to exist the moment he entered that research facility in Stuttgart. Evening sunlight came through the blinds of my study, laying across decades of family photos. Our wedding, with me leaning on a cane I didn't need. The birth of our first child, then the second and third. Graduations, birthdays, holidays, all built on a foundation of blood and lies. I breathed in deeply, enjoying the scents of old books and leather in my sanctuary. The cancer medication left a metallic taste in my mouth that never fully disappeared. 3 weeks since the diagnosis, and already I felt the disease hollowing me out from within. Perhaps that was fitting. I'd been hollow for nearly 40 years. From the kitchen came the rhythmic sound of Mary's knife against the cutting board. Tap, 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 regular as a heartbeat. She sang softly while she cooked, some tune from our early days together. How many meals had she prepared for me over our marriage? How many times had she held me during night terrors, believing they stemmed from combat that never happened? I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and removed a leather journal still stiff with newness. I'd purchased it last week from the bookstore downtown, but hadn't found the courage to open it until now. The journal felt important in my hands. The drawer remained open, revealing the small locked box pushed to the back. Inside lay my original military file, the real one, obtained years ago through a records clerk who needed money more than he valued his oath. Also tucked inside were Dr. Hoffman's research notes, stolen during the chaos of my discharge processing. Evidence of the truth, hidden away like the toxic waste it was. My hands trembled as I placed the journal on the desk. Not just the cancer, though it certainly didn't help. Some tremors had been with me since that room. Those 5 days without sleep that ended with blood on my hands and a secret locked behind my teeth. "Robert," Mary called from the kitchen. "Dinner's in 20 minutes. The kids sent new pictures of Emma's dance recital. Wait until you see her little costume." "I'll be right there," I called back, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Our youngest granddaughter, 5 years old and innocent. Would she look at me differently if she knew the truth? Would any of them? I turned to the window, watching our suburban street as neighbors returned from work. Normal lives, clean lives. The pension check arrived monthly, blood money for my silence. The settlement had bought this house, paid for our children's education. A cruel reward for the monster who survived while the innocent died. The nightmares never stopped. Not really. They'd become less frequent over the decades, but no less vivid. Andrew's face turning purple as my hands closed around his throat, his eyes bulging, pleading. Tabitha's skull giving way beneath the metal tray, blood spattering across the floor. The nurse's shocked expression as surgical scissors plunged into her chest. I closed my eyes, but the images remained, burned into my memory like photographs in negative. What became of Nancy Chen, the only survivor besides myself? Last I knew, she required extensive reconstructive surgery. Did she recover? Did she marry, have children? Or did the trauma of what I'd done to her poison every relationship she attempted? The military had given me a new identity while burying the truth about what happened to the victims. A comfort for the killer, nothing for the killed. I opened the journal to its first blank page and uncapped my pen. The cancer would take me soon enough. Months, the doctors said, not years. Before death claimed me, I needed to decide whether 40 years of lies deserved to end with truth. Would confession bring relief, or would it only transfer my burden to innocent shoulders, Mary, our children, our grandchildren? The pen hovered over the paper, a decision point. The truth would destroy everything I'd built, everyone who loved me. Silence would mean taking my secrets to the grave, continuing to deprive the victims' families of closure. I began to write, the words flowing as if they'd waited decades for release. In 1983, I participated in a military experiment that changed my life forever. Spring in Stuttgart had arrived with unexpected warmth that year. The U.S. Army base buzzed with activity as winter finally retreated. I was 23, a private with nothing but optimism about my future. Every month, I dutifully sent half my paycheck home to Mary, my fiancée. Our wedding was scheduled for August, and we needed every penny for the ceremony and the down payment on the modest house we'd picked out in a suburb of Cincinnati. "Another letter to Mary?" Andrew asked, dropping onto his bunk across from mine. He grinned, flashing that easy smile that made everyone like him instantly. "Nah, just finished yesterday. Sending money home, though." Andrew Collins had been my closest friend since basic training. We'd lucked out getting stationed together in Germany. He was saving for a similar future with his girlfriend back in Nebraska. "You see that notice on the bulletin board?" Andrew sat up, suddenly excited. "Sleep study, $2,000 for 5 days. I stopped midway through stuffing my envelope. $2,000. You serious? Dead serious. They need volunteers for some research thing. That's 3 months' pay for doing nothing but staying awake and probably filling out some forms. I did the math quickly in my head. With that kind of money, Mary and I could afford the slightly better neighborhood she'd been eyeing, the one with the good elementary school. "When do they need people?" I asked. "Monday. Says to report to the research wing at the hospital. Limited spots." We went straight to the administrative office and added our names to the volunteer list. The military was always conducting psychological research, most of it boring but easy money. I'd done a reaction time study the previous year for $50 and a day off duty. Monday morning arrived with a slight drizzle. Andrew and I reported to the research facility as instructed, finding ourselves in a clean hallway in the separate wing of the base hospital. 2 armed guards stood outside a set of double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "Names?" asked one guard, clipboard in hand. "Private Robert Mercer. Private Andrew Collins." He checked us against his list and nodded toward the doors. "Through there, second door on the right." We entered a conference room where 3 other participants already waited. A thin, nervous-looking guy twisted a pencil between his fingers. Across from him sat a woman with alert eyes who smiled as we entered. Another woman leaned against the wall, arms crossed. A man in a white lab coat entered moments later, carrying a clipboard and wearing wire-rimmed glasses. "Good morning. I'm Dr. Hoffman, lead researcher for this study. Thank you all for volunteering." He looked at our small group. "Please introduce yourselves." The nervous man spoke first. "Specialist Marcus Delaney, Communications Division." "Nancy Chen, Intelligence Analyst," said the friendly woman with a small wave. "Private Tabitha Williams, Motor Pool," said the woman leaning against the wall. She had striking features and a quiet intensity about her. After Andrew and I introduced ourselves, Dr. Hoffman nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. You represent a good cross-section of military specialties." He placed 5 consent forms on the table. "This study examines cognitive function during extended periods without sleep. The data will be valuable for combat scenarios where soldiers must remain operational during sustained missions." Marcus raised his hand. "How long will we be awake exactly?" 5 consecutive days, Dr. Hoffman replied. Nancy whistled softly. "You'll remain under observation the entire time," Dr. Hoffman continued. "We'll conduct regular cognitive and physical assessments. The $2,000 compensation will be paid upon completion." Andrew nudged me with his elbow, grinning. Dr. Hoffman adjusted his glasses. "Any questions before you sign the consent forms?" "Is it dangerous?" Tabitha asked bluntly. The doctor's expression didn't change. "Sleep deprivation is uncomfortable but not harmful for this duration. You'll be monitored continuously by medical staff." I signed without hesitation. The money was too good to pass up. After completing the forms, we were escorted to an examination room where medical staff conducted thorough physicals. A psychologist administered a battery of tests, memory exercises, problem-solving puzzles, and personality assessments to establish our baseline functioning. Please surrender all personal items, instructed a nurse, holding out plastic bins. Watches, jewelry, letters, everything. Why? Andrew asked, reluctantly removing his watch. No external time indicators, she explained, and no personal distractions. We changed into standard-issue gray sweatpants and t-shirts with our last names printed across the back. They confiscated our boots, replacing them with soft-soled slippers. Dr. Hoffman led us through another security checkpoint to our quarters for the next 5 days. The common room was spacious enough, with 5 bunks arranged along one wall, a small dining area, a television, and a shelf of books and board games. A separate door led to bathroom facilities. The room was illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting recessed into the ceiling. I noticed small black domes in each corner of the ceiling. Cameras, Dr. Hoffman explained, following my look. You'll be monitored continuously. What's with the guards outside? Tabitha asked. Standard security protocol for research facilities, he replied smoothly. Nothing to be concerned about. The doctor pointed out the intercoms for communicating with the monitoring station and explained that meals would be delivered at regular intervals. 2 nurses would remain on duty at all times, visible through a large observation window on one wall. Remember, the purpose is to remain awake for the entire 5 days, Dr. Hoffman reminded us. Staff will ensure compliance. Questions? We looked at each other, but no one spoke. Then we begin now. He checked his watch. It's 1100 hours, Monday, April 4th, 1983. After Dr. Hoffman left, we settled into the space that would be our world for the next 5 days. This'll be easy, Andrew declared, looking around the room. I once stayed up 3 days straight during a training exercise. The record is 11 days, Marcus offered, his voice quiet. Set by a student in 1964. Nancy clapped her hands together. Well, we might as well get acquainted. 5 days is a long time. As night approached, the realization that the lights would not be dimmed settled over us. Outside the observation window, technicians watched intently, making notes on clipboards. So you're engaged? Nancy asked me as we played cards at the small table. She had organized a game to help pass the time. Yeah, wedding in August. That's why I'm here. Need the money. Same, Andrew chimed in. Saving for a house with my girlfriend back home. Across the room, Marcus had found a medical journal and sat reading, occasionally muttering something to himself. Tabitha had discovered a sketch pad and pencils, settling onto her bunk to draw. The night stretched on endlessly under the unwavering fluorescent lights. We talked, played games, watched an old western on the television. The first night seemed easy enough, though by morning I felt my eyes getting heavy and my thoughts slowing down. Cognitive assessment, announced a researcher, entering with a stack of test materials. Please take your seats at the table. As I worked through the simple puzzles and memory tests, I caught a glimpse of Dr. Hoffman watching through the observation window, taking notes on his clipboard. None of us realized then what those 5 days would bring. The night dragged on under the harsh fluorescent lights. Card games and conversations filled the hours, but as morning approached, I felt a heaviness behind my eyes and a dull pressure in my temples. Simple fatigue, I told myself. Nothing I hadn't experienced during long training exercises. Breakfast arrived on plastic trays, rubbery eggs, toast, and weak coffee that I gulped gratefully. The caffeine provided a momentary burst of clarity before fading all too quickly. First cognitive assessment of the day, announced a researcher, entering with a stack of papers. Please take your seats. I struggled to concentrate on the simple patterns and sequences that seemed harder than yesterday. My pencil hesitated over what should have been easy answers. When I looked up, I caught Marcus watching the camera in the corner, his fingers tapping an erratic rhythm against the table. You okay? I asked him. They're watching more closely today, he muttered. Different people behind the glass. I looked toward the observation window where 2 technicians I didn't recognize from yesterday were taking notes. That's literally their job, Nancy said with a laugh, though her voice carried an edge it hadn't the day before. The hours crawled by. My joints ached from the constant sitting or standing, never lying down. By midday, every small noise, the scratch of a pencil, the sound of the ventilation system, seemed louder. "You keep staring," Tabitha said suddenly, looking up from her sketchpad at Andrew, who had positioned himself on the couch opposite her. "Just bored," Andrew replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What are you drawing?" "Nothing," she said, closing the pad. Andrew moved to sit beside her. "Come on, let me see." I watched as he leaned too close, his shoulder pressing against hers despite the ample space on the couch. Something in his expression made me uneasy. "Another test," called a researcher through the intercom, interrupting the moment. The same puzzles as before, but now they seemed to swim on the page. I rubbed my eyes, frustrated by my declining performance. Dr. Hoffman appeared at the observation window, clipboard in hand, studying us with clinical detachment. "These tests are getting harder," I complained to Nancy as we returned to the common area. "They're the same tests," she corrected me, organizing a Scrabble board. "Come on, who wants to play? Let's keep our minds active." The afternoon tests showed even worse results. My concentration fractured, thoughts slipping away mid-task. Andrew became snappish when Marcus accidentally knocked into his chair. "Watch it," he growled. "Sorry," Marcus mumbled, his eyes darting between the cameras in each corner. By evening, I noticed Andrew following Tabitha around the room. When she went to the bathroom, he waited near the door. When she sat down, he found a reason to sit nearby. She noticed too, growing tense whenever he approached. The overhead lights seemed to flicker, a subtle pulsing that made my headache worse. "Can you fix the lights?" I asked a researcher who entered with dinner trays. She looked up, confused. "What's wrong with them?" "They're flickering." "No, they're not," she said before leaving. "You see it too?" Marcus asked quietly, leaning toward me. "They're doing something with the lights." "Probably just tired eyes," Nancy suggested, though she was squinting up at the ceiling too. I forced down dinner despite a strange metallic taste in my mouth that hadn't been there before. Across the room, Marcus suddenly swept his tray off the table. "There's something in the food," he shouted, pointing at the spilled contents on the floor. "It was moving." "Marcus, calm down," Nancy said, rising from her seat. "There's nothing—" "I saw it," he insisted, his voice cracking. "Little things crawling in the mashed potatoes." A researcher and a nurse quickly entered the room. The nurse spoke softly to Marcus while the researcher cleaned up the mess. I noticed how they watched him, with a mixture of concern and clinical interest. As the night wore on, conversations became harder to follow. I'd start a sentence and forget where it was going. Andrew and Tabitha sat in a corner, heads close together, speaking in low voices. She no longer seemed to be avoiding him. I didn't sleep, of course, but fell into strange waking trances where minutes or perhaps hours passed without awareness. The night blended into morning without transition. Another round of tests. More failed attempts at focus. Nancy organized a word association game that quickly fell apart when Marcus began responding with words that made no sense to the prompts. "Blue," Nancy said. "Surveillance," Marcus replied, eyes fixed on a spot above the observation window. When the lunch trays arrived, I noticed the floor seemed to move beneath my feet, rippling like water. I froze, gripping the edge of the table. "Robert," Nancy touched my arm. "What's wrong?" "The floor," I whispered. "Do you see it?" She glanced down, then back at me with concern. "It's just the fatigue. Try to eat something." Andrew dropped his fork, staring at the corner of the room. "Did you see that?" "See what?" I asked. Something moved. Right there in the shadow. He pointed to an empty corner. I saw nothing, but a chill ran down my spine anyway. Marcus refused to touch his food, insisting again that it was contaminated. When the researcher told him he needed to participate in the tests regardless, he became agitated. "I'm not doing any more tests," You're putting things in our heads." The afternoon brought a new development. Through the observation window, I saw Dr. Hoffman arguing with a younger researcher, a woman with short brown hair who gestured emphatically at our room. "The parameters were approved," Dr. Hoffman snapped, loud enough that his voice carried through the glass. The woman continued speaking, her expression troubled, but Hoffman cut her off with a dismissive wave and walked away. Shortly after, a medical attendant was stationed inside our room, sitting quietly in a corner with a clipboard. He didn't speak to us, only watched and took notes. By evening, the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly with each of my own breaths. I tried not to stare at them, knowing it wasn't real, but my eyes kept being drawn back. Nancy's cheerful facade had cracked. She sat alone, reciting what sounded like intelligence codes under her breath, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. Tabitha and Andrew huddled together on one of the bunks, whispering secrets. Her earlier wariness had vanished, replaced by an unsettling closeness. "They're not letting any fresh air in," Marcus said, crouching by a vent near the floor. "They're pumping something in. Can you smell it?" I couldn't smell anything unusual, but doubt crept in anyway. What if he was right? What if this wasn't just sleep deprivation? The medical attendant watched us coldly, recording our deterioration. I tried to tell Nancy about my concerns, but the words came out wrong and fragmented. "The doctor and the... when they were... did you see how..." She nodded as if she understood. "Something's not right here." As night fell, though there was no darkness, only the eternal fluorescent glare, I became certain that what had started as a simple exercise in staying awake had turned into something far more sinister. The way the researchers watched us, the dismissal of our concerns, the stationed attendant, all pointed to a dangerous change in the experiment's nature. I looked through the observation window to see Dr. Hoffman watching us, his expression unreadable behind his glasses as he wrote on his clipboard. What exactly was he studying? And at what cost to us? The walls pulsed with each breath I took. In, out, expand, contract. I'd been staring at the same spot for minutes, hours. Time had lost all meaning after 3 sleepless days. "Robert?" Nancy's voice pulled me back from wherever my mind had wandered. I turned toward her and recoiled. Her face wasn't right. Her eyes bulged impossibly from their sockets, growing and shrinking with each word she spoke. The rest of her features seemed to slide around her face like melting wax. "Are you okay?" she asked, her mouth stretching too wide. "Fine," I lied, looking away. "Just tired." "We're all tired," she said with a hollow laugh. The constant fluorescent light hammered down on us, never changing, never dimming. My joints ached from the eternal wakefulness, and my thoughts scattered like marbles dropped on a hard floor. Marcus sat in the corner, sometimes completely still for long stretches, then suddenly bursting into frantic movement. He'd been muttering to himself for the past hour, his fingers tapping against the wall in complex patterns. "They're taking the women at night," he announced suddenly, his voice sharp in the quiet room. Nancy's expression turned skeptical. "What?" "When we zone out," Marcus continued, his eyes darting between Nancy and Tabitha. "They come in and drug you both. Take you somewhere." "That's ridiculous," Nancy said, but uncertainty crossed her distorted features. Tabitha looked up from where she sat with Andrew. "No one's taking us anywhere." "I saw them," Marcus insisted, rising to his feet. "Last night. They think we don't notice, but I do. I've been watching. They're doing things to you." "What kind of things?" I asked, feeling a chill despite myself. "Tests, examinations, worse things." Marcus lowered his voice. "They bring you back before morning. They don't want us to know." "That's enough," Nancy snapped. "Nobody's being taken anywhere. We're all just hallucinating from lack of sleep." A researcher entered the room, interrupting the tension. "Time for cognitive assessment." We shuffled to the table. This was the 3rd testing session today. They'd increased the frequency despite our deteriorating condition. The simple puzzles and memory tests that had been easy on day one now seemed written in an alien language. I stared at the paper in front of me. The researcher had asked us to copy a series of basic shapes. I gripped my pencil and tried to focus on the circle I needed to draw, but the page wouldn't stay still, rippling like water. The pencil felt strange in my hand, alive somehow. I watched in horror as the tip began to burrow into my skin, drilling between my fingers like a parasite seeking blood. I dropped it with a yelp. "Problem, Private Mercer?" the researcher asked, making a note on his clipboard. "The pencil," I whispered, staring at my unmarked hand. It was... never mind. Across from me, Nancy had managed to complete most of her test, though her hands trembled. Marcus hadn't even picked up his pencil. He stared at the researcher with open suspicion. When the testing ended, I looked at where Andrew and Tabitha huddled near the bathroom door. Their relationship had become unsettling. They whispered constantly to each other, sharing secrets that no one else could hear. I watched as Andrew's hand wrapped around Tabitha's wrist, pulling her toward the corner of the room. His movements seemed too jerky, too aggressive. Something about it worried my tired mind. I tried to focus on a magazine, but the words jumbled together, forming nonsense sentences. A commotion drew my attention back to the corner. Andrew had Tabitha pinned against the wall, his fingers digging into her shoulders. Her face was twisted in what looked like pain, a whimper escaping her lips. But what caught my attention was Andrew's face. It wasn't his face anymore. His skin bubbled like boiling liquid, the texture changing from smooth to rough. His teeth elongated into sharp points, his jaw stretching to accommodate them. His eyes darkened until they were black pools, reflecting nothing. "Get away from her," I shouted, stumbling to my feet. I grabbed Andrew's shoulder and yanked him backward. He spun toward me, but his face had returned to normal, eyes wide with surprise. "What the hell, Robert?" he demanded. "You were hurting her," I said, looking between them. Tabitha's face showed confusion, not pain. "We were just talking," she said, rubbing her shoulder. I stopped myself. What had I seen? I thought I saw something. "You need to calm down, man," Andrew said. But there was something wrong with his voice, a slight distortion like it was coming through water. I backed away, unsure of what was real anymore. Through the observation window, I noticed the monitoring room was now fully staffed. At least 6 researchers and medical personnel watched us, taking notes and occasionally speaking into recording devices. Dr. Hoffman stood in the center, his clipboard clutched to his chest. I moved closer to the window, straining to hear their conversations. Fragments drifted through. Unprecedented results. Unexpected aggression patterns. Should consider terminating before. Their clinical interest in our suffering made my stomach turn. We weren't participants anymore. We were specimens. A crash from behind made me whirl around. Marcus had begun scratching at the wall with his fingernails, carving strange symbols into the paint. Blood streaked from his damaged fingers, but he seemed unaware of the pain, his eyes fixed and distant. "Marcus, stop," Nancy said, approaching him cautiously. "You're hurting yourself." He didn't acknowledge her, continuing to scratch with methodical precision. The symbols meant nothing to me. Jagged lines and circles arranged in patterns that seemed to move when I tried to focus on them. The door opened and a researcher entered with dinner trays. The smell of food turned my stomach, though I couldn't remember when I'd last eaten. Marcus spun around, his bloody fingers pointing accusingly at the researcher. You're one of them. "Please remain calm, Specialist Delaney," the researcher said, setting down the trays. "I know what you're doing," Marcus screamed, lunging forward. "I know about the tests." 2 security guards rushed in, grabbing Marcus as he clawed at the researcher's face. He fought wildly, his strength seemingly amplified by his delusions. It took both guards to restrain him while a nurse quickly administered a sedative. "No, "Don't let them put it in me," Marcus cried as the needle pierced his arm. His struggles weakened, then ceased altogether as the drug took effect. The guards placed his limp body on one of the bunks. Something snapped inside me. I pushed past the remaining staff and pressed my face against the observation window where Dr. Hoffman stood watching. "This needs to stop," I pleaded, my palms flat against the glass. "We're falling apart in here. Can't you see that?" Dr. Hoffman merely adjusted his glasses, his expression unchanged. "We're making important breakthroughs," he replied, his voice tinny through the intercom. "Just one more day." "We won't last another day," I said, my voice cracking. "You will," he replied with certainty that chilled me. "That's what we're counting on." He turned away, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the glass, a gaunt face I barely recognized, with hollow eyes and skin stretched too tight over bone. Behind me, the room continued its slow descent into madness. Nancy sat rocking in the corner, reciting numbers under her breath. Tabitha and Andrew had resumed their whispered conversation, their faces occasionally changing into something inhuman when I glanced at them. Marcus lay unconscious, his bloody fingers leaving crimson smudges on the white sheets. "One more day," Dr. Hoffman had said. 24 more hours of this hell. I had the terrible certainty that not all of us would survive it. The ceiling pulsed, not subtly like before, but violently, expanding and contracting like a living thing struggling to breathe. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to anchor myself to something solid as reality collapsed around me. 96 hours without sleep. 4 days of uninterrupted consciousness. My mind had finally surrendered to the impossible strain. The fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively, their brightness weaponized against us. Every surface writhed with movement, tiny black insects that appeared and disappeared when I tried to focus on them. They crawled along the walls, across the floor, over the furniture. Some of them had faces, some of them whispered. I rubbed my eyes hard enough to hurt, hoping the pressure might reset my vision. It only made things worse. When I looked up again, the room had stretched impossibly long, the far wall receding into darkness despite the bright lights. Marcus remained unconscious on his bunk, the sedative keeping him under. Nancy huddled in the corner with her knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Tabitha sat at the table, her hands twitching as she stared at them. I wasn't sure when Andrew had moved to the center of the room. He stood there now, his back to me, unnaturally still. I squinted, trying to make sense of his outline, which seemed wrong somehow. Too angular, his shoulders hunched at an impossible angle. "Andrew," I called, my voice sounding distant in my own ears. He turned slowly toward me. I stumbled back, a scream catching in my throat. It wasn't Andrew anymore. His skin had turned ashen gray, stretched too tight over a frame that had grown taller, more twisted. His eyes were black voids, not just the irises, but the entire socket filled with darkness that seemed to pull me forward. His mouth had stretched to an impossible width, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "What time is it, Robert?" the thing asked, Andrew's voice distorted as if coming through water. "Do you know what time it is?" I pressed harder against the wall, my pulse racing. The creature took a step toward me, movements jerky and wrong, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. "Stay back," I warned, my voice a hoarse whisper. "What's wrong with you?" it asked, continuing to advance. The words didn't match the movement of its hideous mouth. "You don't look so good." I glanced desperately toward the observation window. Researchers stood watching, taking notes, their faces blurring and reshaping as I tried to focus on them. Why weren't they helping? Couldn't they see what was happening? The creature reached toward me with elongated fingers ending in jagged claws. "Don't touch me," I shouted, but it kept coming. When its cold hand touched my shoulder, something snapped inside me. Survival instinct overrode all else. I lunged forward, hands shooting out to grab its throat. The skin felt wrong, too smooth, too cold, but I squeezed with every ounce of strength I had left. The monster thrashed against me, making horrible gurgling sounds. I saw only a threat that needed to be eliminated. Its black eyes bulged as I tightened my grip, refusing to let go even as its claws scratched at my arms and face. "Die!" I hissed, pressing my thumbs deeper into its throat. "Go back to hell!" The creature's movements grew weaker, more desperate. I slammed its head against the wall again and again, feeling a savage satisfaction as the resistance in its body gradually faded. When it finally went limp in my grasp, I let it drop to the floor, breathing heavily. A high-pitched scream cut through the room. I spun around to see another creature, this one smaller, with a chittering sound emanating from a mouth that split its face vertically. It scuttled toward me on too many limbs, its movements insect-like and horrifying. I looked frantically for a weapon and spotted a metal food tray on the table. I grabbed it just as the chittering insect thing lunged at me. I swung with all my strength, connecting with what passed for its head. The impact sent a shock up my arms, but I swung again and again and again. The creature collapsed, twitching. Dark liquid pooled beneath it, spreading across the floor in patterns that seemed to form words before dissolving again. "They're everywhere," I gasped, spinning around to scan the room for more threats. A multi-limbed abomination crawled toward the door, this one with Nancy's face distorted across its bulbous head, but the rest of it a writhing mass of appendages. It was trying to escape, to bring back others. I couldn't let that happen. I lunged across the room, grabbing the thing before it could reach the door. It fought back with surprising strength, its limbs whipping around me as I slammed it against the wall. I heard a sick cracking sound as part of its exoskeleton gave way. The creature made a noise, half scream, half insect clicking that chilled my blood. The door burst open. Another monster rushed in, this one dressed in white, carrying something in its hands. Medical instruments twisted into torture devices in my perception. I saw not a nurse, but a sick mockery of humanity, face melting and reforming as it approached. "No more tests," I snarled, grabbing its arms. I saw the glint of metal, surgical scissors in its pocket. I seized them and drove them into the creature with all my might, again and again, refusing to stop even as warm liquid splashed across my hands and face. From somewhere distant, I heard Marcus screaming. I turned to see him on his bunk, now awake and clawing at his own face. "Too much to see! Too much to see!" he shrieked, his fingers digging into his eye sockets. Something sharp glinted in his hand, a pen he must have hidden, as he drove it toward his own eyes. Part of me registered horror, but it felt disconnected, happening to someone else in some other reality. More creatures flooded into the room, these ones uniformed and carrying weapons. Military police, transformed by my broken mind into armored monsters, with faces that changed between human and beast. "Subject Mercer, stand down immediately," one of them barked, the voice distorted and echoing. I charged, beyond reason, beyond fear. I felt hands grasping at me, trying to pull me down, but I fought with a strength I didn't know I possessed. My fist connected with something solid. I heard curses, shouts for backup, the crack of a baton against my shoulder. The pain felt distant, unimportant. I fought as if my life depended on it because, in my delusion, it did. Something sharp pierced my arm. I looked down to see a syringe emptying into my bicep. Almost immediately, the edges of my vision began to blur. As my strength drained away, I caught a glimpse through the observation window. Dr. Hoffman stood watching, clipboard pressed against his chest, his expression unchanged as he watched the carnage. He made a note, his pen moving with unhurried precision across the paper. The room tilted sideways. The monsters holding me became indistinct, their features melting together as darkness closed in from all sides. My legs gave way beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor among the bodies. My last conscious thought was not of the people I'd just attacked. In my mind, they were still monsters, but of a terrible, confused wonder about why Dr. Hoffman was so calmly recording the end of the world. Then blackness swallowed everything. White ceiling tiles swam into focus, then blurred again. My wrists wouldn't move. Something held them against cool metal rails. A distant beeping sound pulsed in rhythm with the throbbing pain in my head. "He's coming around," someone said, the voice sounding as if through water. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt swollen and uncooperative. My throat burned as if I'd swallowed glass. The medicinal smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils, cutting through the fog in my brain. "Private Mercer, can you hear me?" I blinked hard, forcing my eyes to focus. A man in a white coat leaned over me, shining a penlight that sent daggers of pain through my skull. "Where?" I managed to croak. "You're in the psychiatric ward at Stuttgart Military Hospital. I'm Dr. Kleiner." He clicked off the light. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days. The words penetrated slowly through layers of confusion. Images flashed through my mind. Twisted faces, black eyes, creatures with too many limbs. I remembered fighting for my life against monsters that had infiltrated the research facility. "The others?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Dr. Kleiner's face revealed nothing. "Colonel Harris will brief you. He's been waiting for you to regain consciousness." The doctor adjusted something in my IV line. Almost immediately, the fog in my mind thinned slightly, though the pain intensified. "I've reduced your sedation so you can understand what the colonel tells you. If you become agitated, we'll have to increase it again." His tone carried a warning. I became aware of my restraints, thick leather straps around my wrists and ankles, another across my chest. My confusion deepened. "Why am I tied down?" Dr. Kleiner looked at me with clinical detachment. "For everyone's safety, including your own." He left without further explanation, the door clicking shut behind him. I stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together fragmented memories. Something terrible had happened. Something I had done. I must have drifted off again, because the next thing I knew, a different man stood beside my bed. He wore a crisp military uniform with the insignia of a colonel. His face showed no emotion. "Private Robert Mercer, I'm Colonel Harris, Military Intelligence Division." His voice matched his appearance, precise, measured, revealing nothing. "Sir," I managed to respond automatically. "Do you know why you're here, Private?" I searched my scrambled memories. "The sleep study. Something went wrong." "Yes." He pulled a chair close to my bedside and sat, his posture remaining rigid. Something went very wrong indeed. Colonel Harris opened a folder he'd been carrying. 4 days into the sleep deprivation experiment, you experienced a severe psychotic break. You attacked the other participants and medical staff. My chest tightened with panic, the monitor beside me beeping faster. "No, that's not..." There were creatures. They had taken over everyone's bodies. Those were hallucinations, Private. Severe hallucinations induced by extreme sleep deprivation. His tone remained clinical, as if describing weather patterns. "You weren't fighting monsters. You were attacking your fellow soldiers and medical personnel." Cold dread settled in my stomach. "I don't understand." Colonel Harris removed a document from his folder and held it where I could see the military medical header. "Private Andrew Collins died from manual strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. Private Tabitha Williams died from multiple blunt force injuries. Nurse Ellen Reynolds died from multiple stab wounds with surgical scissors." Each word hit me like a physical blow. I shook my head, refusing to believe despite the growing horror in my chest. No, that's not possible. They weren't human anymore. They had changed. Specialist Marcus Delaney used a pen to inflict fatal wounds to his own eyes and brain during your rampage. The colonel continued as if I hadn't spoken. He had regained consciousness from earlier sedation just as your attack began. I squeezed my eyes shut, but couldn't block the images now forming. Andrew's face as I choked him, Tabitha's body crumpling under my blows, the nurse's blood on my hands. Nancy? I whispered, afraid to hear the answer. Private Chen survived. Barely. She'll require extensive reconstructive surgery to her face and jaw. She may never speak normally again. A sob escaped me, the first crack in a dam about to burst. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I thought they were monsters. Your perception was compromised by severe sleep deprivation. The experiment went far beyond approved parameters. For the first time, a hint of emotion, cold anger, entered his voice. Dr. Hoffman has been removed from his position and is facing consequences. Tears streamed down my face. I pulled against the restraints, wanting to curl into myself, to disappear. The monitor beside me wailed as my heart rate spiked. I killed them, I whispered. Oh God, I killed them. Colonel Harris watched impassively as a nurse rushed in, injecting something into my IV. The edges of my vision grew soft again, the crushing weight of guilt momentarily cushioned by chemicals. This incident is now classified at the highest level, Harris continued once I had calmed. What happened in that room can never become public knowledge. Through my drug haze, confusion surfaced. Classified. But there needs to be an investigation, a trial. That will not happen. His voice hardened. This experiment was unauthorized. Dr. Hoffman exceeded approved parameters and created a situation with catastrophic consequences. If this becomes public, it would damage military research initiatives for decades. The colonel placed another document on my lap. This outlines your new narrative. You were injured during a training exercise when a grenade malfunctioned. You'll receive an honorable discharge with full benefits and a substantial settlement. Settlement. The word felt dirty in my mouth. You want to pay me for killing 3 people? The settlement is for your injuries and trauma from the training accident. He corrected coldly. The official record will show nothing else. And the families? What will they be told? That their loved ones died in a classified military incident. Nothing more. He straightened the papers. National security protocols will ensure this remains buried. I stared at him through tears and medication. You're covering it up. We're containing an unauthorized experiment gone wrong. His eyes bored into mine, and providing you with a chance at a life which is more than your victims have. The cruel truth of his words silenced me. I had no right to object, no moral ground to stand on. I was a killer, a monster. Your fiancée has been notified of your training accident and is en route from the States, Harris continued. She'll arrive tomorrow. You'll be coached on your cover story. Mary is coming? Fresh panic surged through me. How can I face her? You'll face her as a wounded soldier, not as a killer. His voice was steel. That's the only way forward for everyone involved. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. When I opened them again, Harris was replacing documents in his folder. One more thing, he said, noticing my gaze. During your discharge processing, you'll be given access to certain documents. My advice is to focus on your recovery and forget what happened here. He stood to leave, then hesitated. The nightmares will come. The guilt will remain. But remember, revealing the truth helps no one now. It only creates more pain. After he left, I surrendered to the drugs pulling me under. In my last conscious moment, I prayed not to wake again. But I did wake, again and again, over the following weeks. Each time brought fresh horror as memory reasserted itself. I begged for more sedation, more forgetting, but the doctors began reducing my medication, preparing me for Mary's arrival. The day she came, they removed my restraints and moved me to a private room that looked less institutional. A staff sergeant coached me through my story in exhaustive detail. The training exercise, the grenade malfunction, my injuries and psychological trauma from the accident. Your apparent grief and distress will be attributed to survivors' guilt and trauma, he explained. This is entirely consistent with your cover story. When Mary rushed into the room, her face streaked with tears, I nearly broke. Her scent, her warmth as she carefully embraced me, the love and concern in her eyes. All of it felt like punishment rather than comfort. "Robert, thank God you're alive," she whispered, cradling my face. "When they called, I thought I'd lost you." "I'm here," I managed, the words sticking in my throat. "I'm here, Mary." She ran her hands over my arms, my face as if confirming I was real. "They said there was an accident, a grenade, that you saved people." The lie sat bitter on my tongue. "I don't remember much. They say that's normal with trauma." "It doesn't matter. You're alive. That's all that matters." She pressed her forehead to mine. "When you're better, we'll go home. Start our life together like we planned." I nodded, unable to speak. Behind her, through the window to the corridor, I saw Colonel Harris watching, his expression making the message clear: perform well or else. Over the following weeks, I settled into my role. The staff psychologist, briefed on my cover story but not the truth, treated me for PTSD from my combat accident. I learned to redirect conversations when they approached dangerous territory. I practiced looking people in the eye while lying. Mary stayed in Stuttgart, never leaving my side. The military provided accommodations and arranged for her extended leave from her job back home. Together, we discussed using my settlement to buy a house in Vermont, far from any military base. "A fresh start," she said, hope bright in her eyes. "Somewhere peaceful, where you can heal." One night, as we reviewed house listings in the hospital lounge, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. "Do you still want to marry me, Mary? After everything?" She looked up, surprised. "Of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" "I'm not the same person. The accident changed me. At least, that part wasn't a lie." Mary took my hand. "For better or worse, Robert. I made that promise even before saying the words." 3 months after waking in restraints, I stood at an altar in a small chapel on the base, my dress uniform hiding scars that didn't exist from a grenade that never exploded. Mary was radiant in her white dress, her eyes shining with tears of happiness as we exchanged vows. I felt Colonel Harris's gaze from the back of the chapel throughout the ceremony. The day before our departure for the States, I was called to complete my discharge processing. As I signed paper after paper, an opportunity presented itself when the clerk was called away. On his desk sat Dr. Hoffman's research files, waiting to be archived under classified protocols. I quickly slipped the notes into my jacket, my nerves racing. I also requested a copy of my military file for benefits purposes. The sympathetic clerk, seeing my war injury, made the copy without hesitation. These documents were evidence of the truth, my insurance policy, and my punishment. I would keep them close, a reminder of what I'd done and what had been covered up. Our house in Vermont was everything Mary had dreamed of. A colonial with white shutters, maple trees in the yard, distant mountains visible from the front porch. We used the blood money to create a picture-perfect life, complete with a white picket fence. I found a job at an insurance company. Mary taught at the local elementary school. From the outside, we were the ideal couple starting a new life. But at night, the victims came for me. Andrew's bulging eyes as I squeezed his throat, Tabitha's broken body, the nurse's blood coating my hands, Marcus clawing at his own face, Nancy's shattered jaw and the sound of her muffled screams. I learned to stifle my own screams, to wake silently from nightmares soaked in sweat. When Mary stirred beside me, I blamed phantom pain from injuries I'd never suffered. I tried therapy once, driving 2 hours to find a therapist who didn't know me. But without being able to speak the truth, the sessions were useless. I couldn't tell him I was a murderer masquerading as a hero. Over the years, I carefully researched what had happened to the others. Nancy Chen had moved to Seattle after multiple surgeries, living a quiet, reclusive life. Andrew's younger brother received a medal in his memory. Tabitha's mother was eventually moved to a nursing home in Florida. The nurse's daughter became a teacher in California. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew that their loved ones had died by my hands while I battled monsters that existed only in my mind. As Mary and I started a family, my guilt only deepened. How could I hold my newborn son with the same hands that had taken lives? What right did I have to happiness when 4 people lay in graves because of me? But I maintained the facade. Decades passed. I coached Little League, attended PTA meetings, and celebrated anniversaries. I played the role of a wounded hero, accepting the occasional "thank you for your service" with a modest nod. Only I knew that the real monster wasn't the ones I'd hallucinated in that room. The real monster was the man behind the practiced smile, living a lie built on unmarked graves and military secrets.